suddenly the air got really thick. It got so thick that the leaves on the trees stopped rustling. They immediately got still. And I felt this pressing up against me from all sides. And my dad comes through this invisible wall, and he was escorted by at least 3 black figures. You can tell that he's very relieved to be out of hell. God's having this conversation with me, and I said, I don't want my dad to go back there. Can you please just destroy both of us like we never existed? So my dad looks over at me, and he looks at me right in the eyes, and he says, I'm proud of you. And as soon as he said that,
hello everyone, I'm Vladimir Proknevsky. I'm recovering from the flu, so I hope my voice holds up, but welcome to God's Voice today. This podcast is all about sharing powerful stories of supernatural encounters and near-death experiences, moments that show us just how real and active God is. Today, I'm joined by my good friend Cory Enderby. Cory hit rock bottom, battling addiction and losing everything. But just when it seemed like things could get any darker, he found himself on a bus, facing demonic forces, hearing a voice from God, and making a decision that could have changed his eternity. What happened next is nothing short of incredible. Stick around. You don't want to miss this. Let's dive in. Well, Cory, thank you so much for being on the show. I've known you for so many years. I've been following you from afar, but I'm so excited to finally have you on the show. And Cory, before you share your supernatural encounters, can you kind of paint the picture for the viewers, for everyone watching, what your life was like leading up to those experiences?
Yeah, I'm writing a book right now. It's almost finished, and a lot of this is going to be covered in the book in more depth. But I came from a broken childhood, broken home. My dad was a really bad alcoholic. I just saw some rough things growing up in the home. This is just an example. One morning, all 3 of us, my brother and sister, were in the dining room, and my mother walks behind my dad. He's in his suit ready for work, and she pours a big thing of sugar on his head. And then he grabs her and flips her over his shoulder onto her back. Immediately, all 3 of us started crying in unison. And it's just things like that I had to grow up with and around. And eventually I moved in with my dad, and my dad died. He died really young. All I ever saw from my dad really, and it's hard for me to share this because my aunt, she got on to me one time about my testimony, about how I talk about my dad in it. But everything I'm sharing is honest and it's truthful. It needs to be shared. I know that she doesn't like it. It affects our relationship, and it hurts me that it does. But at the same time, it's really what happened. And it's the truth, and I'm going to share it with the world. So, but my dad, he was like I had mentioned, he was an alcoholic. He was a cheater too. He cheated on women and things like that. I have experiences with that, seeing that growing up. And one day I was taken out of school, and I was being picked up by a neighbor. I don't even remember who she was, but she took me to my grandmother's, and my grandmother told me my dad had died. So he died when I was 12 years old. That was a really rocky relationship with my dad. I love my dad, and I know he loved me too, but I never saw him pray. I never saw him read a Bible. I never saw him go to church. I never saw him do any of those things. And then he died, and then that was the end of it. That's the last time I saw him. And I grew up angry after that. I was angry. Just an example of the level of anger that I had, that something I'm not very happy that I did, but I ended up moving in with my mom after my dad died, and I threw my skateboard through the sliding glass doors and shattered that. So that was just an example of the anger that I had. And I started to rebel. I started to get into Metallica and Minor Threat and some underground bands and things like that. And it wasn't long before I wasn't really into drugs, though. That's the thing. I was just into the music, but I wasn't really into drugs. And then one day I met this girl, and I looked up to her. She was a senior, I was a junior, and she was real wealthy, and I was attracted to her, so I kind of looked up to her. And she said, have you ever tried cough syrup? And I said, no, I don't even know what you're talking about, And she said, well, here, let's get you a bottle of it. And I sat down in her house and I drank the entire bottle. And I just remember feeling so euphoric, like I was so high, like I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. I tried to go home that night and my mom, I could barely make it up the apartment stairs. I was stumbling and my mom didn't even want to let me in the house. It was that bad. So that was the beginning of cough syrup for me. And it was always one of those things that, I did other drugs too, but those weren't always available. Sometimes the dealer is out or you can't get it for whatever reason, and cough syrup was always the thing that I knew that I could go to get high. And so it became a real stronghold for me. Not only that, but I had taken the cough syrup one time and I had hallucinations and I thought that was really interesting too. So it was pulling at me in all these different ways, I know it's over the counter, but it's really satanic, the things that it can do to you. The things that you see while you're on it, the things that you experience that you think about while you're on it, it's really demonic. But it was always the thing that I would end up going back to. And I ended up getting married and I struggled with cough syrup and other drugs too during that marriage. And I lost that wife. The thing about that was I was trying to do better, actually, right there at the very end when she left me. I was actually trying to go to AA and do some things right with my life. It was like I had finally come around to where I was ready to get my life straightened out. And I began to take steps to do that she leaves me. And so I was like, you know what? If this is how it is, I just don't care. I was really upset that I had tried to get my life straightened out. And then that's what happened. So I started using cough syrup every day. What I noticed about the cough syrup was it would change you. Like after taking it for about 30 days, it really gets into your system and it really becomes a highly demonic thing at that point. It's hard to explain it, but you change as a person. You become different. It's almost like you're using a different side of your brain or something. I don't know how else to describe it, but you would really change. And so I got married again and I ended up losing that wife too because of my addictions and my things, the cough syrup and all of this. And I was really down and out. I was like, I don't know how to get off of this cough syrup. I just don't know how to do it. I've tried and it's hard. And I'm in hell right now because I just gone through that second divorce and I really, really loved that girl a lot, and so it really hurt me to go through that divorce. And when I went through that divorce, I was really depressed and I was on the drugs and I was on the cough syrup and I just didn't feel like I could get off the cough syrup. And I just thought it would be best if I ended my life. The reason why I share this part of it is because this to me is this is what started me on the journey with God. I think that if the Lord hadn't responded to me that day, then I would have committed suicide. But right when I was about to commit suicide, I asked God if he was real. I said, are you real? If you're real, I won't do this. And I mean, I had the knife right there. I'd already taken a test swipe on my hand. My hand was already cut. I still have the scar on my hand today. So I was ready to go onto my wrist. And I felt this peace flood the room, like this joy, this love, this peace. Like I can't explain it. Like I've felt his presence a lot. I've felt his presence a lot over the years, but I don't know that I've ever felt, and I've even been drunk in the spirit before where I was in a meeting and it was so intense and so powerful that's the best way I can describe it. It was like being intoxicated in the spirit. And I know that might be radical for some people, but it happened in a meeting and I really felt like that was from the Lord, So anyway, I've experienced the presence of God, but that day, the presence of God was so thick and so strong. I knew without a doubt that God was real. I knew there was no doubt in my mind that he was real and that God had answered that prayer. And so I put down the knife and I just sat there just being throbbed by his presence for a minute or two. And I knew that after that, I said, okay, I can't commit suicide. I know God's real. So that's out of the question. So I didn't know what to do. So I went to Teen Challenge. I tried to get into Teen Challenge. And this is kind of a long story. I'll try to condense it a little bit, but Teen Challenge was full. So I had to live with a Christian family in their home while I waited to go to Teen Challenge. And I relapsed while I was there. And the relapse was really powerful because I picked up a guitar and I started playing things on the guitar that I'd never learned before. Like songs were coming to me that I'd never learned in my life, and I was playing them under the influence. And I learned that day that Satan can enter into people and play through them. That was interesting to me, but it was so powerful that I wanted to take that to Austin, go play for people. I knew that if I could play some of that stuff again, then I could go to Austin and probably be a big hit. So I told the Foleys, the Christian family that I was living with, look, just drop me off on the side of the road and I'll figure it out. You know, I don't want to do this Christian thing anymore. And I made a really bad decision after I said that, basically turned to Satan and I said, Satan, I don't want to follow Christ anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like how Christians are. I don't want to follow Christians anymore. I want to follow you. And for the first time in my life, actually for the second time, the first time I ever heard a voice was I was 16 years old and I would play Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven on my record player. And every night before I went to sleep, I heard somebody say Cory one time. So that was the first time I'd ever heard a voice, but I had not heard a voice since then. And that day after I said, Satan, I want to follow you now, a voice immediately came to me and began conversing with me in my spirit. It's not like something I could see that was there, like a being came to me and I could see it. I could hear it. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to Austin and take some of that music that I played the other night and play in Austin. I think that would be a real hit. And he said, okay. And if there's anything else you need from me, just say my name 3 times, Satan 3 times. And, I said, okay. Immediately, right after I had that conversation with that demonic spirit, this truck pulls up, this Bronco pulls up, and these 2 people get out. These 2 people, a guy and a girl, and they're dressed in all camouflage, and they walk over to me and they said, where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go to Austin. They said, come with us. And so I went and got in their vehicle and we went straight to the bus station. No questions asked. They bought me a ticket and walked out the door. I was like, man, a lot was happening in my head. I was so blown away by what was happening that it was so fast that I didn't have time to think, you know what I mean? To think it through. Is this a good idea? Should I even be doing this? What's going on here? But it was happening so quick. And then I hear this other voice come to me and it's the voice of God. And he said, whatever you do, do not get on that bus. And I thought, I don't know about that. I think I want to get on the bus. The voice came back again and it said, whatever you do, don't get on that bus. That bus is about to pull up. Sure enough, right after God said that, the bus pulls up. There's these giant windows in front of the bus station. You could see the bus pull right up, and that was my bus. I know it sounds kind of crazy. That's why I'm telling you, I wasn't able to think any of this through. It was all happening so fast. And I was so dead set on going to Austin and playing music that I guess I just was ready to go. You know what I mean? I wasn't listening to God. So I get to the bus and the bus driver tells me, your seat's in the far back. And I've ridden the bus before and they never say that. Usually you just go find a seat, anywhere that you can sit. They don't tell you where to sit. So I go to the far back and I'm just sitting there and I'm on the bus and the bus takes off. And now I'm thinking like trying to process everything. It's happening so quick that I'm not thinking clear. The voice of God comes back to me and he says, you need to get off of this bus. I looked to my left for the very first time. I looked over because there were 2 people sitting beside me. In the far back, there's 3 seats and the 2 seats closest to the window were taken. And I looked over at him and the guy near the window had a hat on that said Satan on the back of it. And the girl next to me had a wristband on that said Satan in leather. That scared me because I'd never seen Satanists before that I know of. I'd never seen people that actually follow Satan. So I got scared and I said, okay, God, I'll get off of this bus, but can I get off at the next stop? Because I don't want to go tell the bus driver, look, pull over on the side of the highway here and drop me off. I'd rather do it at a bus stop. Right as soon as I agreed to get off the bus, the girl she had a book open. She was reading from a book, a small book, and she shut it. And the guy said, I could hear him. He said, what is it? And she said, it's the Holy Spirit. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. What's going on here? I'd never met anybody that actually worked for Satan like that, So sure enough, as I'm getting off the bus driver tells me, he said, are you sure you want to get off? Hell's in the forecast. And I was like, okay, that's a really strange thing to say to me. Because looking up at the sky, it was a bright blue, clear sky, no clouds in the sky, and so it was just a really weird thing to say to me. And I said, yes, I want to get off the bus. So I was exhausted at this point by all that I had gone through. It was just so much so fast. Maybe I had made a wrong decision after all by following Satan. This is dangerous. This is scarier than I thought it was. It's more real than I thought it was. Maybe this is just not the right way to go, after all. And so I walked over to an abandoned building. There were a lot of like abandoned buildings and things like that were around Big Spring at that time, the city that I got dropped off in. And I walked over to this abandoned building and I just laid on the concrete inside of it and just fell asleep. I was so exhausted. And late in the morning, must have been 2-3 in the morning, God wakes me up and he says, you need to go back to the bus station and get a ticket back to Midland. And I said, okay. I said, I don't have any money. I had $10 in my pocket. That's all I had. I said, I don't have any money. I'm thinking that I don't have any money and the bus stop's not going to be open this late. It's a small town. They're not going to be open at this hour for sure, And so I get down there and the bus station's open. And there was a real bright, cheery guy behind the counter. And he said, where would you like to go? And I said, Midland. And he said, that'll be $10. And I thought, wow, this is so strange. So I go and I sit down in this completely empty bus station. There's probably 25, 30 seats in there and it was completely empty. And I sit down and I'm just waiting on the bus. And this lady walks in to the bus station, this big heavy set lady with dark rings around her eyes. She walks in and she sits directly in front of me, across from me. And she said, are you sure you want to leave? And I was like, wow. This is crazy. This is so real, and I said, yes, I want to leave. And, she immediately got up and walked out of the bus station. But I was just so blown away by all that I had experienced in probably 24 hours. It was just so much. But what I learned from that is there are people that work for Satan. There's actually people that just like we work for God, we serve God. There are people out there that work for the devil. They probably pray to him like I did, and they probably, worship him and do all of these things. You'll hear that argument all the time that Satanists don't really believe in Satan. They just believe in a concept or an idea of Satan. They actually believe and follow Satan. They hear from him. They know they're communicating with demons, with demonic spirits. So I thought that was shocking to me. To make a long story short, I got back to Midland and I tried to go to Teen Challenge, but they wouldn't take me in. They wouldn't let me detox. I needed a couple days to detox. They wouldn't let me do it. So they ended up taking me to the Salvation Army. And I started doing pretty good at the Salvation Army. I wasn't taking any cough syrup. I started leading worship at the Salvation Army Church. I started working for the Salvation Army. There were a lot of good things happening for me. Somehow, I started using cough syrup again. I got comfortable and relapsed. I lost everything. So here I am without anything, no place to go, no job, no transportation, nothing, just on foot. And I said, you know what? I think I want to go to Canada. I just had this strong desire to go to Canada, to be somewhere cooler. So I decided that day to start hitchhiking up to Canada from Texas. I was out there hitchhiking for, I think, a year and 4 months, I think is what it was. I actually went back and Google mapped everything, every place that I had been, and I calculated the time that I was homeless and all these things traveling and for my book, and it turned out to be a year and 4 months of being a homeless traveler. And I go into some more details about that and a lot more details in my book and then a few more details in my testimony on YouTube. But I ended up at a homeless shelter. I blew out my knee and I ended up at a homeless shelter in Ukiah, California. And this is when they had a homeless shelter there. I don't think the shelter is there anymore, but they did when I was there. It was brand new. So here I am with a blown out knee. My knee, I had to have surgery on my knee, but I had to wait for the surgery. I had to get sort of a state approved surgery. I had to wait through all the channels and to go through that sort of the government to get it done. And so I was stuck at this homeless shelter for several months. I did okay. I was still smoking weed, but I wasn't really doing cough syrup until I started doing cough syrup. And that was when I got a little bit of money. We did a wine convention. We played music at a wine convention in downtown Ukiah, and I made $100. And I took it, went and bought cough syrup. One thing that was interesting about this was that the very night that I had taken the cough syrup, I'm in the homeless shelter laying on my bunk. And I heard the Lord, and he said, you need to make a decision tonight. Are you going to follow me or are you going to go this way? And as I'm sitting there, I'm feeling really good on the syrup. I'm feeling really good because I hadn't been on the syrup for a little while. When you put it back into your system, it's like a rush. And so I'm feeling really good. And I'm thinking, gosh, I really don't want to follow God right now. I like this. This feels good. I kind of want to go this direction for a while. And as I started to think that way, this flame, this heat, extreme heat began to creep up from my feet all the way up my legs to my waist. And when it got to about my waist, I thought, okay, God, because I began to think about hell. Like I could really go to hell for this. Like I knew God was real. I knew hell was real. And I thought, this isn't something to play around with. You know what I mean? Like if I actually go this way, I may never come back and end up going to hell. So I said, all right, God, I changed my mind. I'll quit. I'll get off of this cough syrup. And the heat began to recede again back down to my feet. So that was really interesting. Another interesting thing was there was this guy that showed up at the homeless shelter while I was on the syrup. He was pacing the floor and he was speaking backwards. And I think that's what Satanists do, is they speak backwards. And he was speaking backwards. I have a feeling that he was there for me. I don't know what he was there to do, but I have a feeling that he was there for me. Because when I came back to the shelter that night, normally the way homeless shelters work is you have to be out during the daytime, looking for a job at the library, doing something productive. You can't stay at the shelter all day. They kick you out at like 7, 8 in the morning, and then you can come back in at like 5, 6 p.m. And so I had a spot right before the shelter opened in the evening. I had a spot that I would go stand in. That day that I was on the syrup, that guy is standing right there in my spot. Nobody ever stands in that spot. He was right there in my spot. And the guy was pacing the floor, speaking backwards. And it was just really, I felt like he was there for me. It's kind of hard to explain it. I don't know how else to explain it, but I just had a feeling that he was there for me for something. But I had repented. I told God, okay, God, I repent. I'll get off of the syrup. And I said, look, I think what I need to do though is to get away from this shelter. I need to get away from this city, Ukiah. So I checked myself out of the shelter. I began to walk down the road toward Fort Bragg, which was toward the coast. It was about maybe an hour away, if that. And that's where I was going to go. I was going to go there and start over. And so I grabbed all the jewelry. I had like a tiger's eye and a crystal and things that I had picked up, out there on the road from different people. And I ripped it off. I even took my knife out, and I had real long hair. And I cut a big chunk of it off to make sure that I would cut my hair as soon as possible. I didn't want to have strong intentions and then suddenly have diminishing intent set in where I would change my mind. I was trying to make all these changes very quickly, very abruptly. That way I would follow through with it. So I cut a massive lock of hair off of it, started walking down the road, and the Lord told me, he said, I want you to go back to the shelter. And I thought, oh man, are you serious? You want me to go back to the shelter? Because I knew that I was going to make all these changes. The people at the shelter were going to think I was out of my mind or something. What they called me was Tarzan. I had long hair. They called me Tarzan. I wore, Jimi Hendrix shirts and Grateful Dead shirts and just looked like a hippie, and so it's going to be very unusual for me to go back and cut my hair, dress differently. I was a little bit nervous about that, but he told me to go back. And so I obeyed and I went back to the shelter that night and they let me back in. Usually they don't let you come back in like that, but they let me come back in because it was the same night. And the very next morning, someone cut my hair right off, shaved it completely bald. So I had no hair at all. And then I immediately got rid of all my shirts. And I went up to a Goodwill and got a voucher, got some street clothes, that were just plain, just normal street clothes that you could see anybody wearing normally. So it was a big change for people to see me. But what I noticed was that people were inspired by it, actually. They were really inspired. I noticed that I inspired people. So what I thought would happen was I'd get laughed at, shunned, talked about, all these things, but it actually, over time, I noticed that it inspired people to change. So that was interesting. So anyway, I get out of the shelter. I come down for housing. I go into more detail about all this in my book, but I come down on housing. I move out of the shelter. I'm doing really good at this point. I'm going to church and I relapsed. Everything was going good in my life and I relapsed on the syrup. This relapse was a major relapse. So I ended up losing everything all over again. But before I lost everything, I had that encounter with my dad. So I go to this park one night with a friend of mine named Tim, and we're at the park. It's in the fall. It's fall. The leaves are rustling on the trees. They're dry leaves are about ready to fall off. It was real windy that night too and cold. And so we're in the park. We're just talking about things. I'm trying to invite him to church. Here I am relapsed on cough syrup, inviting him to church. Suddenly all the leaves, the air got really thick. It got so thick, you wouldn't believe it. I don't even know how to explain it. It got thick. It got so thick that the leaves on the trees stopped rustling. They immediately got still. They went shh, shh, just like that. And the air got really thick. And I felt this pressing up against me from all sides. I felt like something was pressing up against me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it and I could sense it. And Tim got really scared. He said, I've got to go. I've got to get out of here. And he left. He immediately left. I talked to Tim after I released my testimony on YouTube, I found Tim on Facebook and I happened to talk to him about that night because that was the last time I ever saw him. He told me, he said, I've never felt evil before like that in my life. I was so terrified. But when I left that place, I felt peace come back to me. I never want to experience that again. I forget exactly what he said, but it was something like that. So here I am. I'm all alone in this park with all this activity around me. Tim's gone. I'm by myself in the dark. I go get in my truck and I start to drive away and I pull off the highway onto one of my favorite places. I used to have a place along the highway that I would go and I had an 18-foot box truck that I used for work and personal use. I would pull off the side of the road and play guitar, or unfortunately, I would also look at pornography and things like that in the back of the truck. I actually left out a really interesting part, but I'll keep going here. So I pull off the road to my favorite spot. I don't remember the air being quite as thick as it was at the park, but I remember activity being all around me, like spiritual activity, like it was heightened. Like it was very serious. That's all I can explain. It was just it felt very serious around me. I'm having a conversation with God. My dad comes through this invisible wall. Like he just was suddenly there. He wasn't there, then he was suddenly there. And he was escorted by at least 3 black figures. And he sat down right in front of me. And I don't know why. I go into detail about this in my book, but they were smaller. I don't know why. Don't ask me why, but they were smaller than a normal person. I don't understand why. He sat down in front of me, and he's staring at me, and you can tell that he's very relieved to be out of hell. Very relieved. You can just tell by the look on his face, the way that he was acting. God's having this conversation with me, and he's saying that he's asking me if I want to go to heaven. Do you want to go to heaven? And I said, I kept telling him, look, can you just destroy me and my dad? I don't want my dad to go back there. Can you please just destroy both of us like we never existed? That was what I was telling him, because I didn't want my dad to go back there, and also I was feeling pretty crummy about myself. I didn't think I was fit for heaven. I'd never really, really, really lived for God. I hadn't really tasted God like in a real serious way yet. I did when I was going to commit suicide, but what I mean by that is I hadn't really walked with God in his word and for a long period of time, where you really start to, I'll be honest with you. Here I am. I've been following the Lord now since then. I'm just now starting to really taste God. So even though I've been free for this long, I'm finally starting to taste God just recently, like the love of God. I'm starting to experience his love in deeper ways than I ever thought possible. So that's what I mean. I hadn't really tasted God. I hadn't really felt like I was saved or even worthy to be saved. And so I was telling God, can you just destroy both of us? God said, don't you want to come here? Your grandfather's here. The only grandfather that was dead at that time was Grandpa Enderby, my dad's dad. And I learned later through my aunt that my grandpa at the very end of his life began to go to Bible studies and things like that. So that confirmed that he was saved. He was the one that God was talking about, Grandpa Enderby. So my dad looks over at me as I'm having this conversation with God, and he looks at me right in the eyes and he says, I'm proud of you. And as soon as he said that, these demonic spirits came from around my backside. I couldn't see them while I was sitting there talking to my dad. They were back behind me, I guess. They came back around and they grabbed my dad. I guess he wasn't supposed to say anything. He wasn't supposed to talk because they began to just beat him up. And like ferociously beat him up, not just a light beating. They were really getting after him, and he began to disappear, and I couldn't see him anymore, but I could still hear them beating him up for a little bit longer. And all I could hear was him grunting and groaning as he was getting hit, and then all hell broke loose after that. The Lord asked me, he began to shift on it a little bit. He asked me, he said, are you sober right now? And I began to lie to God and tell God that I was sober. And it got so bad that I even started to say, yes, I'm sober. And as soon as I said that, I slurred my speech. So there was no hiding from God. This demonic spirit began to beat on me. I could hear him hitting me, and I could feel it slightly too. And whatever he was hitting was inside of me. It wasn't the physical. I asked God, I said, God, can you come and help me? Can you help me? I knew that these demonic spirits were all around me and I needed help. I needed to get out of this jam that I was in, but I wasn't even being honest with him. Maybe if I had been honest with him and told him that, hey, look, I guess I am not sober right now. I do need some help. Maybe then he would have helped me. I don't know. But I wasn't even being honest with him. And I just remember hearing what I thought I heard him say, I can't, it'll start a war. So I don't know what that means. I decide that I'm going to drive to San Francisco, which was an hour and a half away to get to the airport to get away from these demonic spirits. I thought if I could just get on a plane and fly away somewhere, I'll be able to get away from these demonic spirits. I go to San Francisco airport. I park. I rush inside. I'm ready to get a ticket. The clerk is very attentive, very sharp, helping me. And then suddenly she begins to get very confused. I mean, extremely slow and confused. Like she didn't even know what she was doing. She couldn't even function. And the manager came over, and at first he was very alert and attentive, but then it started happening to him. And I was like, these things aren't going to let me escape. They're not going to let me get on a plane. I guess I left all my bags, everything in the airport, and ran outside the doors. As soon as I ran outside the doors, I felt this tear along my back calf. Something had grabbed my calf and ripped it off. I could feel the wetness of it, and I could feel that something was missing. My calf was no longer there. As far as pain or anything like that, I didn't really feel physical pain, but I could feel the wetness of it, and I could feel that it was missing. My leg actually got weaker when they did that. At this point, I was very nervous, very frantic, very rushed, full of anxiety. I mean, I'm not calm at all right now. At that moment, I'm not calm. I'm very full of anxiety, very rushed. I began to try to say the Lord's Prayer. I didn't really even know the Lord's Prayer, but I tried to say it the best I could. I tried to do some rebuking. Nothing seemed to work, but I did feel like my calf came back on. I don't know what that means, but it did come back on after about a minute or so. And then I got up and I began to run back to my truck because I was going to drive somewhere, just get out and drive and go and get out of there. And I was so frantic and so full of anxiety that I drove my truck into an overhead. You know, those overhead passes, the concrete passes. I smashed right into the top of that with this big box truck, backed out of there. And then I began to try and find a different way to get out of there. And this police officer pulled me over, and he said, let me see your license and registration. And so I get it out, and here the whole time I'm being hit on. I'm being tormented. I can hear voices. I'm being tormented. I'm being hit on while I'm talking to this cop. I'm trying my best to play it off the best way that I can because I didn't want to get committed somewhere. I thought for sure they're going to commit me somewhere if they find out I'm going through this. So I pull out my license and registration. I hand it to him, and then he immediately starts getting very slow and very dumb. And they're doing that to him. It's hard to explain how they get really, really slow like that. It's like they're good for nothing. They can't do anything for you. And I had to, sir, can I have my license and registration back? And he said, yeah, here it is. And he handed it right back to me. That's all. He didn't even check it or anything. He was so stunned by what they were doing to him. So I pulled away and I began to drive back toward Ukiah. And at this point, I'm utterly exhausted. I mean, I was so full of anxiety that night. Anxiety has a way of making you feel exhausted. If you're too tense and too frantic, it's exhausting. So I pull over on the side of the road, really not safe for me to be driving. It was at nighttime at this point. And I pull over and I just need to go to sleep. I needed to go to sleep. I was so exhausted, and I fell asleep. And when I woke up in the dream, I have no idea where I was at, but it was inside this room. And this room had a sepia look to it. I don't know what other word to use, but it was sepia looking. Like the color, rusty looking. It was really weird like that. The atmosphere was like that. But in this room, it was really trashed, really dark and really trashed. It looked scary, this bedroom. And there's a door here, and the door opened, and this giant creature in the shape of a man, but he wasn't a man. He was like a monster. He began to stab me. To be stuck with a knife is one thing, but when it's real jaggedy like that, and it makes it even worse, it makes it scarier. And as I'm getting stabbed by him like that, I'm immediately on top. Right after that, I'm immediately on top of this roof. And I kind of briefly look around, and it looked like the atmosphere was just all sepia. I was on top of a building, so I could see the surroundings, but it looked like what hell might be or something. It was terrible. And I saw this creature, two creatures running full speed at me. and they were a ways off, but they were coming at me full speed, with everything they got. And then when they finally got to me, I remember one of the creatures had this weapon with a Chinese star on it. It was real rusty, and he was stabbing me with that. And I don't remember what the other monster had, but he was stabbing me too. And it was just horrible. And I immediately woke up in my cap, and I was like, what was that? Was this all a dream? Was I just dreaming all this? And then I heard the voice come back and say, no, what did you think I'd left? So the demonic spirit is still there, tormenting me, just tormenting me. I'm in an utter point of utter exhaustion at this point, and barely moving, just like this, just getting rocked. What I noticed that when I woke up out of the sleep, there was my eyeball, my spiritual eyeball, or whatever you want to call it, your spirit was dangling on my cheek. I could feel the vein, feel the ball on my cheek. I remember asking God, please put that back in. Please, will you put that back in? The demonic spirit was talking like, what, do you want me to put that back in for you? I'll put it back in, and he put it back in, then he popped it back out again. And then finally my eyeball was put back in, and it stayed there. But one other interesting part about that night was that there was another demon that showed up. I could tell another demonic spirit showed up, and this was a higher ranking demonic spirit. Somehow I knew that he was in charge of demons, and he showed up, and he put demonic spirits in me. And I'm not joking. He put so many in me. I just remember my mouth opening on its own. I didn't even open it myself. It opened on its own until all these spirits went in, and then it closed on its own. And I remember being filled with all these demonic spirits and looking down at my arm. And I don't know if you ever seen that movie, The Matrix, but it was just like that. It was horrible. And my physical body is what it looked like that. Not even in the spirit. I couldn't see the spirit, but the physical was doing that. That's how bad these demonic spirits were that were inside of me. And I felt so horrible when they were in me. I felt like, I just felt so terrible. Like, it was just the worst feeling. I don't remember what I said. I don't think I said anything. And then he pulled them back out of me. I'm just beat down at this point. What happened after that was this demonic spirit, instead of hitting me, I don't know if it was the same spirit or a different spirit. I have no idea, but a spirit began to dig down into my head, and it was just clawing at my head. And it was just doing this constantly. I just told myself, because it was Saturday night, I told myself, if I can just get through this night, I can't go back to sleep, because I definitely don't want to go back to that place again. I mean, this place is bad, but in that place I could see them too, and I didn't want to go back to sleep. I was like, I can't go back to sleep. There's no way I'm going back to sleep. I make it through the night, and I pull up to this church, and I run inside. I mean, I literally ran inside. I'm still full of anxiety, still rushing. It's hard to explain the level of anxiety, but I rush in real quick, breathing hard. And I'm like, where's the pastor? I need to talk to the pastor. And she said, he's over there. And I ran over there, and he was crouched down by this bookshelf, and he was looking at all these books. And I began to explain to him what was going on. Like, I need help. And he began to act real stunted and slow. And I was like, oh my gosh, they can actually get to a pastor, so I knew that once he was like that, there was no getting any help from him at all. So I turned around and walked out, and I drove around some more, and I found a different church, and I ran into this church, and it was an all women's Bible study meeting. And I ran in there. There were just women gathered around this table. I said, can I stay here and attend this Bible study with you? And they said, sure, you can. So I sat down, and I never got touched. No more scratching, no more clawing, no more hitting, no more torment, nothing. And they were not affected at all, these women. So I sat through that thing for an hour, and I was afraid to talk to them. I should have talked to them and told them what was going on, but I was afraid that they would commit me somewhere. What I needed to do was tell them what was going on and get prayer and get help. They would have helped me. But I was real young in the faith and scared that they would commit me instead, and I never told them, but I thought it was over because I didn't get touched that whole hour in there. And so I walk out and I walk back to my truck when it's over. And I heard that voice say, "What did you think I'd left?" And so he began to claw again into my head, and he's clawing away, and I'm tormented to the max. I was no longer safe for me to drive. That's how tormented I was, how exhausted I was. So I had to pull over and start walking. And as I was walking, I felt that spirit break through whatever he was clawing into, like he broke through it. And his hand went all the way in. I could feel his hand enter into my body and pull up on something. I don't know what he grabbed. I don't know what he pulled up on, but all I know is that when he pulled up on it, he was yanking on it real hard like that, trying to get it out. And when he was pulling on it, I fell down to my knees. I couldn't stand. Whatever it was my life force, because I couldn't stand without it. And so here I am on my knees, and I'm thinking, wow, this is it. Like I pushed God too far, like I'm going to hell, like it's over for me. I was thinking that way because I tried everything and there was nothing that I could do to stop it, and I was so exhausted at this point that I was just gave up. And as soon as I gave up, the demonic spirit left. I just knew that it was over. Don't ask me how. I just knew that it was over. So I went through some trials after that experience, but overall, I finally came to the place where I got thrown in jail for something, for possession of marijuana. I had made it back down to Texas. I left California, went back to Texas to where my mom is or was. My mom said, I basically hitchhiked all the way down to Texas from California. I took the train from Sacramento to Winnemucca, Nevada. And then from there, I hitchhiked back down all the way to Texas. And my mom said, why don't you stay a while? And so I stayed with her. I started doing really good. Then I relapsed again. I got a job. I have no idea. That just shows you, for me to go through all of that, to be on the cusp of hell, and to still go back to cough syrup, shows you the level an addiction will take you. It's just, hell can't quench it. I don't know. It's only Jesus can satisfy that. So I ended up relapsing. I ended up going to jail. My jail experience was absolutely horrifying. It was terrible being locked up in that place with people that were crazy and that were fighting. And it was just a violent place, and I just said, I've got to change. I've got to stop this. I told God, I said, God, if you can get me out of all of this, I'll follow you. And sure enough, I slowly began to make changes. I checked into a homeless shelter. I eventually moved up to staff at the homeless shelter. Then I eventually moved in with a roommate. I stayed there for a while. For that first year, it was really still like a living hell a little bit, because all I did was go to work and come straight home and go to my room. I had nothing on the walls in the room. It was just white walls, no TV, just a guitar and a Bible. If I got the urge to go out or to leave the apartment to do something stupid, I would just go to sleep. So I found myself sleeping a lot, taking naps a lot to cope, and there was a big spiritual war happening inside that room. Like, for example, one time, I was laying down to take a nap, and I had been asleep maybe for 15 minutes, and I just rolled over just like that to switch sides. And I opened my eyes up just briefly as I was rolling over. And as I did, I saw a face about that close to mine, a white face with shiny white skin and these eyes that were just buggy, that were locked in on me. And I rolled back over and then the face was gone. But just little things like that, were happening. It was a very supernatural experience that first year, fighting for my life, fighting for my soul, studying the word, going to church. I made it. I eventually worked my way up and got off of everything. I haven't touched cough syrup. It's been almost 20 years. I give God all the glory for that. There's no way I'd be able to sustain it without Jesus. But I finally kicked that addiction and got set free in God and pursue God now, and his presence. And that's kind of my story in a condensed way. I think my testimony on YouTube is about 2 hours and something.
And it's worth the watch for everybody watching. It's worth it. I remember watching it. I think it had to be like 8 or 9 years. I can't remember when you posted it. And then I immediately reached out to you. We became friends on Facebook. We stayed in touch over all these years. And I even remember, we were just talking about this before this show. I remember sharing with you about my God's Voice Today encounter with Jesus. This is years ago before it came to pass. I always wanted to interview you. Now, all these years later, I finally have you on the show. So excited. It's interesting. You kept saying you heard God's voice and you heard devil's voice. I'm curious, how did you know the difference?
It's hard to explain. It's like you just know inside of you, it's him. That's the best way I can describe it.
Well, and I'm sure there's probably some peace that comes with God's voice, and you almost feel the energy too, right?
Yeah, there's peace that comes with it and authority that comes with it, but it's also just like it's his voice. You know that you know.
And is it almost like your own thoughts?
No, it's not like that.
Is it like an audible voice?
Yeah, it's an audible voice that you can hear in the spirit.
Earlier, you were talking about Stairways to Heaven, right? That song. And I remember back in the day, it went kind of viral on YouTube where people were playing it backwards and it was saying something about thank you, Satan, or something about, if you look it up on YouTube, it's there. And when you were talking about that guy at the homeless shelter, he was speaking backwards. You said Satanists speak backwards. I wonder if there's something to that.
I try not to focus too much on Satan. I went through a period of focusing on Satan a lot. After going through the experiences that I went through, I was really inclined to study Satan and figure him out and find out all this about the devil and what's he doing. And that just brought me deeper into darkness. It took me to places where I was always focused on Satan and it magnified his presence in my life. So I began to shift and began to focus on the Lord only. And then, of course, that magnified in my life. So I just noticed that whatever I was focusing on, I went through a period of focusing a lot on Satan, that I was being drawn to Satan.
It's interesting. I remember early on when I first moved to the United States, like early 2000, all the conspiracy theories that were out there. And I remember I got so deep into it. Whatever you focus on grows, right? And I was focusing on all this, Illuminati, all this stuff, to the point to where I remember one day waking up and thinking, what's the point? Like, why start the family? Why get married? It's all going to end. They're all going to put us in these concentration camps and this and that, right? But you're right. What you concentrate on, what you focus on grows.
You steer toward, whatever you focus on.
Dwell on everything that's good. Something, it brings more peace. You can only think one thought at a time. Why dwell on something that's evil, right? And something else you were talking, the kids in the bus, the Satanist stuff. Remember when the girl, you were saying how the girl said that's the Holy Spirit. What do you think they were going?
I don't know what they were doing. When I got on that bus, I looked to my left and to my right, and I saw what I thought were rappers. And I just felt like that they had done the same thing that I was doing, selling my soul for music. And so I don't know if that was some kind of spiritual bus. I have no idea if that was a real bus. I don't know where we were really going. I don't know if it was all some trick and they were just trying to take my soul, and to hell, and God was helping me, rescuing me, from them doing that.
Music. It's interesting because right before I hopped on this call, I have two boys, 8-year-old, almost 9 this month, and almost 12-year-old. And they're into music. My 12-year-old is recording music. He's into it. And he's listening to, thank God, to Christian music. But today, right before this call, they were talking about secular music. And I know there's power in music. And so what do you make of secular music? Does the devil use it to lure the people into his kingdom, so to speak?
I mean, I think if you're real strong in God and you happen to listen to some secular music, I don't think it's going to steer you in a wrong direction. I think that you might not be comfortable while you're listening to it. There might be some tension, some cognitive dissonance, but I think you're going to be strong enough in the Lord. But I think if you're weak in the Lord, that could be a big time trigger for somebody. When I finally got sober, the first year I didn't listen to anything. I had a friend of mine show up at my front door with a CD. I think it was from the band Tool, and he wanted to give it to me. It was their newest one. I just stood at the front door waving goodbye to him, and then I stuck it on the on top of the door. I didn't even bring it in the house.
There's something about cluttering your mind, your soul. It's kind of like almost like we have a certain amount of bandwidth throughout the day, right? And if you fill your mind with empty calories, noise, there's not much left for the Holy Spirit, right? And it's almost like you got to have a detox and change your diet, spiritual diet, right? What you feed on, you become. You are what you eat. You are what you think. And yes, I think the first thing, like elimination diet, right? Almost detox yourself from all that trash. It really doesn't bring anything good.
What I listen to most of the time now is Christian music. I love to listen to worship music, just whatever's on K-Love or Air One on the radio. I do listen to other kinds of music. As a musician, I'm inspired by a lot of different artists and things like that. But what I notice is that the Christian music is the music that fills you up. It takes you where you want to go. It magnifies his presence, in your life. He's able to put those songs in your head. So when you're down and out, when I'm having a tough day, I'll notice that God will put a song in my head. And that lets me know that he's there with me and that he loves me and that I can even pay attention to lyric, whatever's being said in the song in my head. What's the lyrics saying there? What is he trying to tell me? So I notice that God, when I listen to Christian music on the radio, God will later play those songs in my head. And I just think the more we get those things in our head, the better.
It's interesting you say that, because I remember I used to, not that long ago, I'm embarrassed to admit to this, but I used to consume a lot of secular music, and I wake up in the middle of the night just singing it. So it's like replaying in my head. It's replaying in my head. And same thing, I remember listening to worship songs. You wake up in the middle of the night and you just like replaying that scripture in your head. It's like almost subconsciously, you stop listening to that music, but subconsciously it's still on the replay, And if you fill yourself up with bad music, it's going to be on the replay. I'm thinking about your dad right now, that journey. Oh my gosh, like seeing that. I can't imagine seeing your dad, and as you were describing that he was relieved just being there for a second, not being tormented. I couldn't help but think when he said, "I'm proud of you," it's like he wanted to get back at them. That was his one moment to just get back at them. How often do you think about that moment?
I honestly don't think about my dad because I don't like to think about where he's at. I'd love it if God pulled my dad out from hell and he would be in heaven. I don't know. I don't know what God's capable of doing, but if that's where my dad is, if he's in hell right now, then I just try not to think about him. It's too much.
It's serious stuff, right? That's why I started this show, to warn people, let people know there's a choice you got to make. This is life or death. You don't play games with that. Throughout your whole journey, as I was listening to you, you kept referring, hearing God's voice, hearing devil's voice. Is it something that you hear still today? Do you hear God's voice clearly and in the same way, or is it different? Does he speak to you through scripture and other things?
What I hear God speak the most is he'll say my name, Cory. Like if I'm beginning to think about something that I shouldn't think about, like the devil will put a thought in your mind and that'll start to rotate in your mind a little bit. You start to think on it. I'll hear the Lord interrupt me. He'll say, Cory, and then it snaps me out of it. So that's what I hear. I hear him say my name.
It's interesting. You hear the name, and this just happened not long ago. I live, a 2-story house, and my bedroom was on the 2nd floor. In the middle of the night, just a knock on the window, boom, 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 boom. And at first, it's kind of scared me, but like sometimes in the middle of the night, as I'm sleeping, I hear like a little gentle knock, and I wake up. I'm like, "Yes, Lord," and start praying. It's almost he wakes me up in the middle of the night to pray for something, for a situation. I just go straight to prayer. So to me, like I get those little moments. Sometimes I hear like my mom's voice. My mom's still alive, but she would say in Russian, Vladimir would be like Vova, and she would say that, and it's just gentle. And I'd get up and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's time to pray. Like every time I hear a knock, a little knock, gentle knock, or of my mom's voice saying my name, it's almost like time to go to prayer. So it's interesting how we all have our own ways that God gets our attention. It's something else you mentioned, and it's kind of interesting because this demon or whatever was crawling, doing stuff to you. And it's interesting. There's one person I know And that person always tells me, said a couple of times, it's like, when you're in here, this building, do you feel like something's crawling on you guys? And that person always has to go to the car for lunch break to just kind of sit there. And as you were sharing that, I do wonder if there's some kind of spiritual thing to that person. So for some reason, as you were sharing that, it's almost like, man, I should be praying for that person. Because the moment that person shared that with me, I remember thinking, that's not right. Something's not right there. This is not normal. It's crawling on your head. What do you make of that?
Yeah. Wow.
How would you deal with that?
I would pray, and I would pray for that person, and even command it to leave if that person's willing, you can command. I believe that you can also command from a distance, though. I believe that you can, because I've done this before. We used to have a prayer line where we would, and I remember I would teach on the prayer line, like Bible studies and something. And we would have people from all over the world call into the conference call. Well, one day there was this lady that was interrupting. She was just picking and interrupting. And it was embarrassing, to me. It was because it kept interrupting me and stuff. And then it finally dawned on me, this is demonic. So I took authority, even though she was in Florida, I think. I took authority over the demonic spirit and told him to be quiet in the name of Jesus. And as soon as I did that, she began to weep and apologize. So that taught me that you can take authority over a demonic spirit from a distance. You don't have to necessarily be right in the presence of that person. You can do it from a distance. In that case, I would take authority over the demonic spirit, because the word of God says that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if he hears us, we have it. All you have to do is pray something. And if it's God's will, then it's going to happen. And you just stand on that faith. It's such a powerful thing.
From your story, when you went to that church, and even the pastor was affected by that, by the spirits, that when you shared that part, it was a little disturbing, because how can a man of God be affected by these spirits? How do you make sense of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if he was truly a man of God. I mean, how could that happen to a man of God? It didn't affect those women. Not one woman was affected in there. So I don't know. Maybe he wasn't a man of God. I hate to say that, but I just don't think you're going to be affected like that if you're a man of God. I would hope not.
I'm curious, Cory, your take on this. What do you make of Christians that say it's okay to drink?
Well, I say that Jesus said that, the Pharisees called him a wine bibber. So they wouldn't have called him a wine bibber unless he was drinking real wine. So I think that he did drink real wine. Do I think he drank it to excess? No, I think that he may have had a glass or a few sips of it, but I do think that he had some. Now, that doesn't mean everybody can have wine, I don't agree with that. I think that some people need to stay very far away from wine. It depends on the person, how mature you are in God, and not everybody can have wine. But I do believe based on that scripture, that because they called Jesus a wine bibber, that denotes that he did have alcoholic wine.
Another question, as you were talking about your family, you have multiple siblings and your mother. Is your mom still alive?
Yeah, she is.
Is she a believer? Did you share that story with her?
Yeah, she's a strong believer. Yeah.
How do your siblings take this, and your mom? What does she make of this story?
It seems like it's such a downer to hear about our dad being in hell. I'm not sure that they know what to think by it, honestly. It's so hard to talk like that in front of my family about, my dad being in hell, our dad being in hell. It's very hard for me to talk about that.
No, I get that. That's man, I can't even imagine, especially you seeing that scene and living with those images and knowing that your dad and seeing the desperation.
I just kind of let them believe what they want to believe. And I don't really bring it up. I don't talk about it. I think I did bring it up and talk about it for a while in the beginning. I just sort of let their memories be what their memories are. They're going to read the book. I'm sure they'll read in depth the whole thing, because I go back into my childhood and I discuss more in depth about that. And I put more about my mom in there, and my brother and sister, and, people are strewn through there. So I think that, it'll be an interesting read for them. But
curious, we'll get to the book here at the end here shortly, but I'm curious about practical things. For example, people watching right now, right? They hear these testimonies, and I see the comments that really want that depth to that relationship with Jesus, right? They want the practical things. And, there's so much out there. If you listen to all the pastors of the world, you become more confused. Like, what is the way? Like, how do you really seek the Lord throughout your journey? And my gosh, what a journey you've had, right? What some practical things viewers that are watching right now that are struggling with their relationship with God, they want to get closer. They don't even know how. Like, what are some practical things they can do every single day to get closer to Jesus?
Well, I'd say if you really want to get close, I noticed that my relationship got bumped up tremendously when I started praying longer. It wouldn't just be a 5-10 minute prayer. It would be 2 hours, 3 hours all night long. So if you want to get really serious and really press in and really get God's attention, to really sell out and go a little bit crazy with it, you know what I mean? To pray long prayers and just because it's endless what you could pray about. You could literally pray about anything that comes into your mind and all the various angles of that. And you can cover a lot in prayer, and it goes by pretty quick. But fasting is another practice. If you can, I know that some people may not be able to for health reasons, but if you can fast, that's a really powerful way to draw near to God. Go on a 3-day fast, water fast, or even a 7-day fast if you want, just water.
Those are tough. I've done a 5-day water fast before. Oof. You know what? Actually, the first couple of days are the hardest, but then after that it gets easier. I remember thinking I can probably go for longer. No, fast. It's interesting when you fast, there's this humility that comes over you. When your stomach is full, when you're fed, there's this arrogance that comes. But when your stomach is empty, all of a sudden you're sensitive to minor things. Like you can walk by a homeless person and before you would just walk by them. But when you're hungry, when you've been fasting, all of a sudden there's this humility that comes over you and you can't overlook another human being. You feel the feelings you've never felt before. You have clarity. This fog just lifts off and you have this clarity, peace, joy, calmness. I love fasting. I recommend trying it if you can. What about when it comes to reading the Bible? It's tough. You pick up the Bible and then it's just like 5 minutes in, you're like, man, for some reason, it's the one thing that's the hardest to read for people. How, I guess, the good question was like, how did you get into it and were able to read it more? Is it just, you just push through it?
Yeah. I do the Bible in a year plan on YouVersion. And when I finish it, I start over again. I just read it every year and I just never stop. And they just give you like a few chapters to read every day. And I don't overdo it. I read 3 chapters a day and that's it. If there's 5 chapters in that day, I'll only do 3. So it may take me 2 days to do a day. So I don't overdo it. But I ask the Lord, give me a love for your word. Give me a love so I can feast on your word. And the word is so powerful. That's the most important thing is the word because it's a living Bible. It's living and active. And studying the word of God and standing on the word of God is so powerful.
It's interesting you say that, Cory, because I remember back in the day, I taught myself web design, web development, graphic design, videography, all of this stuff. And it's interesting because I always used to think that you need to have hours and hours every single day, nonstop, studying something. But I taught myself, where it started for 5 years, I passed trace in the University Hospital at Ohio State University Medical Center. And in between breaks, like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, I passed trace early and I got my phone out and watched tutorials. I picked up a little project here. There are little bites. But when you spend the time 5 minutes, watch a little quick tutorial, and then you walk away, and then as you're passing trace, for example, for me, I was thinking about it and getting deeper revelations about what I watched. And I feel like it's the same way about reading the Word of God. You read one chapter, one verse, and then you walk away and you're thinking about it. So a lot of times people just try to cram it all in. But I think when it comes down to knowledge, you just got to take a little bites, take it in and then walk away and think about it. The more you meditate on it, the more revelation, the more things come out of it, right? And so for those that are watching, if you're struggling reading the Word of God, just start small. You don't have to read the whole thing, right? Just 5 minutes.
Don't kill yourself over it, You can read the whole Bible. It might take a year and a half to read it, but read it, just a little bit every day. And there's Bible plans if you need a little help, and like I said, I don't even read if there's 5 chapters in a day, and I'll only read 3. So I read 3 a day. And sometimes it takes me 2 days to read 1 day. So little bits and pieces.
And another thing, gathering with other believers is so important. That's why I started a private community over at family.godsvoicetoday.com, and it's totally free. Every day I lead prayer calls and then other people leading them as well. So you need to be plugged in the community. Join us. It's absolutely free. Get together. There's some amazing, powerful people in the community that can help you along the way as well. And speaking of reading, Cory, I'd love to hear more about your book. When is it coming out? Tell me more.
Well, I did my goal last year was to edit the book 4 times.
Wow. Why 4?
I don't know. I just said 4 and finally did it. I finished my goal in December, like the last week of December. So I was able to edit it 4 times. And all I have to do now, really, the book is pretty much edited. It's good to go. I just need to go through and add titles. Like I like it in books where you have frequent titles, like you can read for, 10, 15 minutes and then another title pops up, and that's a good place to put your bookmark. I like it when books are like that. That's just me. But so I want to make it the same sort of thing to where it's divided up into sections pretty well. So I need to do that, and hopefully it'll be released next year.
Why did you wait so long? I'm curious. This experience happened, again, I remember bumping into your story. I'm 37 now. I want to say it was like when I was 29. And you waited this many years to write the book. How come?
Well, it's taken me 4 or 5 years to write the book. It's taken a long time to write it and edit it to get it to where I like it. I think it's a good quality book that people will read. But honestly, I didn't know that I could write a book until I went to college. When I went to college, I learned how to write. And so I was equipped to write the book after college. So,
well, and are you self-published?
I'm not sure. I'm going to talk to a friend of mine she has a publishing company, and I'm going to talk to her and see if we need to go through her or through Amazon. I'm not real sure yet.
Well, Cory, in closing, I'm curious. And by the way, you've been so generous with your time. We're nearing 2 hours.
Thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate it. So how can people get a hold of you, and when it does come out? By the way, when it does come out, I'll email it to our list. I'll make sure that everyone that's following this channel will know about the book. But is there a way they can subscribe to an email list or something? Or how can they follow you or get in touch with you? Well,
my email address is the best way to get in touch with me. It's coryenderby@gmail.com, coryenderby@gmail.com. And I don't have a bio page or anything like that yet. Maybe I should do that. That sounds like a good idea. But I guess on Facebook, you can look me up, David Cory Enderby on Facebook. We can be friends.
That's right. I've been friends with Cory since, I think, 2017. And Cory, when you do come out with the book, you should come out with an audiobook as well. And you should read it from the author in your own voice. I think a lot more people will get the audiobook these days. People are getting lazier to read every year, It's a lot to read. Well, a lot of us are just like, I'm guilty of that because I'm always on the go, and I'm more than likely to consume an audiobook than an actual physical book because I'm in transit a lot, commuting, and so highly encourage you to come out with an audiobook. Well, Cory, man, thank you so much. It's been years in the making. Finally, after all these years, on Messenger, I remember just having these conversations over all these years. Finally, I get to see you face to face, and this conversation finally happened. So I'm so thankful for your time, and it's going to bless a lot of people, Cory. Appreciate you being brave, sharing your story. I know it's not easy.
Sure. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. Before you go, I have another powerful near-death experience for you with my friend Keisha, who was a witch about to marry Satan himself until she had a near-death experience where Jesus showed her where witches go in hell. So you don't want to miss this powerful testimony. It should be coming up here on the screen somewhere. If you don't see it on the screen, check the description below. Until next time, have a great rest of the day. And I look forward to getting to know you inside of our free private community over at family.godsvoicetoday.com. Talk soon. Bye-bye.